All right, so let's get to categorizing some of these transactions. Now you'll notice from the last time I was in here, we now have an option to learn about taking payments online so that we can get paid faster, which in theory makes sense, but now it is a nuisance. So I'm just going to hit that X and make that go away. Again, QuickBooks is always going to keep popping things up and you'll constantly be closing out of suggestions. But as long as you know where you're going and what you need to do, you're going to be just fine using the platform. So I'm going to go into bank transactions. Also could have used my bookmark up here. Here's another advertisement for taking payments. Get rid of that so I can free up some screen space and see more transactions. So we changed it so that we have columns for money spent and money received. But this view is still a little bit limited in what it's allowing you to do. I prefer, it's just a preference because I am on the accounting side of it, but I prefer to view this transaction screen specifically using the accountant view as opposed to the business view. A couple little things are different about it, but I think it's a whole lot easier to navigate and to kind of see what's going on if you're looking at the accountant view. In order to change that, all you have to do is go up to settings. In the bottom right here, it says switch from business view to accountant view. Once you do that once, it should save it for every other time that you log in to QuickBooks. Let the page load and kind of reallocate where all those items and transactions were. And then we'll start recording some transactions. All right, so here we have the accountant view. And again, maybe it's just the grid lines, but it makes it seem a little bit more approachable to me. So in the first column here is our date, self-explanatory, then our description. So just keep this in mind. The description itself, for example, this Amazon, not the Amazon.com in red, but just the Amazon, this is the description that QuickBooks is guessing. Based on what that bank detail says, if I scroll down here, you can see Amazon.com is actually what downloaded from the bank. That's what you'll see in red here. Because of that Amazon.com, QuickBooks says, hey, this is actually just an Amazon transaction. Don't worry about the .com. They're trying to make it easier on you just to see just a word or two from the bank detail about what that transaction was. But it can be incorrect sometimes. Things like gas stations, like Shell, some names of businesses sometimes just get mixed up. Like I know there's a Marshall Home Services in Skipack that often gets confused with Marshall's, the store. It's like a retail store. So things like that, names that are similar can sometimes get mixed up and confused. Unfortunately, there's no way to add the bank detail as a column here. So we have to rely on the description for the most part until we open this up to see the bank detail. So just keep in mind, if you ever are going through your transactions, you really just don't recognize the description that QuickBooks is suggesting, that might not be the correct description for that transaction. You'll have to click into the detail and see what the detail of the transaction so that you can see what the bank detail is. It's hiding under here. It's also usually in the memo so that you get a better feel for what the actual transaction was so that you can categorize it properly. The next column over is the payee. So this is who you're paying, and that makes sense for expenses. However, if it's money deposited, that's not really a payee anymore. Instead, it's a customer. And the payee and the customer are very helpful to have complete and accurate books. Because as soon as you enter Amazon as the payee, for example, we can go to that vendor and run a report for all transactions purchased on Amazon, regardless of whether we categorize them as inventory, supplies, a reimbursement, a personal expense. Doesn't matter what the category is. You can search by this vendor or payee on another screen that I'll show you, and it'll list all transactions that were purchased from that payee, regardless of where they're categorized in your books. That makes it a lot easier to find things, A lot easier to recategorize things if you're like, wait a minute, man, those Amazon transactions, I didn't want to put them all in supplies. I wanted to put them in, cost of goods sold, or another item where we directly sold something to the customer. It changes your percentages and all kinds of other calculations related to your profit. So you can easily recategorize things just by going to that vendor screen for Amazon and then changing where everything is categorized. So I highly recommend, for every possible transaction that you have in QuickBooks, whether it's income or expense, you assign a customer or a vendor to each transaction. The next is the category. So this is basically where in your books, what account in your books do you want to put this to? Is it going to be a cost of goods sold item? Is it going to be an inventory purchase? Is it just a distribution? Where exactly is it going? And if I click on this, I can see all the different options for the accounts that we currently have set up. Now remember, these are brand new books, so we're going to be creating accounts as we categorize transactions. But right now, for example, inventory is a great spot. Cost of goods sold is another good spot. Or something just as simple as office supplies. If you type in office supplies and it's like, listen, we don't recognize that, it's not anywhere in your books, all you have to do is click add a new account. It'll create a little pop-up window. You'll say that this is not a bank account. This is going to be an expense. Your options here are AR, accounts receivable, money that's owed to you, other current assets, fixed assets, other assets. None of this applies. This is just an office supply expense. It's just a regular expense. The detail, this doesn't matter so much. You can leave this kind of whatever it suggests. This is more if you're exporting this information to another system, where do you want the groupings to be? So it would have advertising and promotional. Underneath of it, it would have office supplies. But we don't do that with anybody's book, so you can leave it as advertising. You don't have to get specific and find that office and general administrative expenses, but you're welcome to if you want to. I'm going to change the name to office supplies. Even though I typed it on the first screen, it doesn't save it. You always have to type it in again. And I will hit save. If this is a sub account, let's say we have a specific building that we rent, and there's multiple buildings. Let's say we have 2 or 3 locations, and you want to have one office supply account under each location. You can do that by creating a sub account, and you just say that, hey, this location, let's call it the shipping location, has office supplies under it. So then we can run a report that shows our P&L. Everything under that shipping location will show up categorized properly. We're not going to do a sub account for this, though. It doesn't really match what we're trying to do with this expense. So I'm just going to hit save and close. And now office supplies is truly an expense that we have available to categorize things in. I'm going to do the same thing for the vendor. Should have done it first, but I'm doing it now. So Amazon was not listed as one of the vendors that we have in QuickBooks. So I'm going to add a new vendor. This allows us to create as much or as little information about the vendor as we want. Always keep an eye on that contact type at the top, whether or not you want it to be a customer, someone that's purchasing things from you, or a vendor, someone that you're paying for things. Amazon's case, I don't need their email address because I'm not communicating with them like that. I don't need their phone number, address, anything like that. But if it is a vendor that you're using frequently, someone that you need to have that information stored, the address is a great place to store it. And this vendor contact information is great for email addresses, phone numbers, websites, any other helpful information about that vendor. There's even a spot for notes if you have specific notes about agreements you have with them or how they like to be paid, things like that. Those all go here under the vendor as well. And the same thing for if you're tracking 1099 payments to somebody and you're doing the issuing of the 1099 through QuickBooks, this is where you're going to do it. You're going to input their social security number or EIN. QuickBooks is going to save it once, mask it so that you can't ever touch it ever again. And then at the end of the year, you'll just run a report saying, hey, give me a list of all the expenses paid to Amazon because I want to issue a 1099 to them. Again, keeping it very simple. This is just Amazon. We're never going to deal with them like that. So all I need is their company name. I'm going to hit save. And then I'm back to where I started. And now Amazon is a vendor. I lost my office supplies. So I'm going to put that back. You can also separate things with tags and other ways to remember what transactions were for. For the most part, most people don't need to use tags or have any other separate categorization, especially for something like office supplies. So I'm just going to go ahead, as long as my vendor and my accountant properly input there, I'm going to hit add. And that's going to be the very first transaction that we're adding to our books. So now we see at the top, confirmation that the transaction was categorized. I see now that we only have 204 transactions to categorize. And if I go into categorized, I can see there's one Amazon expense for $176. Like I said in the previous video, if you make a mistake, you realize this was the wrong thing, you didn't want to do that, you can either edit it from here, you can choose even a different payee if you realize you really messed up, or a different account. You can say, hey, this is just uncategorized income. It's almost too simple to edit transactions like that. And if you just want to put it back on the bank download screen, just hit undo, and it'll throw it back on for review, and it'll show you that you have 205 left. So let's categorize one more Amazon, and then we'll actually look at what that did. So now, because our description is the same as the one we categorized, QuickBooks is smart enough to guess and say, hey, is this the same Amazon that you paid for the other item? And it pops in Amazon as the vendor for us, which is very helpful. And this, I'm also going to put to office supplies and save. Now we're going to run two reports just to kind of show you on a very basic level what we're doing to our books. So I'm going to first open the balance sheet, and then I'm going to open the profit and loss. Balance sheet here. Profit and loss. All right, so first up, whenever it loads. So first up, we're going to use balance sheet. So you can see that as of September 30th, as of today, we have negative $343 in our bank account. And why is that? Well, that's the total of the two transactions that we just recorded. According to QuickBooks, there was no beginning balance that we brought in. We haven't recorded any income yet, so that's not increasing our bank balance. So all that QuickBooks knows is that we had two expenses and they hit our business bank account. So for all QuickBooks knows, that's our actual bank balance. We overdrew by $343. I know that's not true because if we sort by date, we'd see other items, income items. However, right now, all it has in it is those two transactions. Anytime you see a link for a number, you can always click on it to see the detail behind it. That's a really, really helpful tool. One that QuickBooks has that a lot of the other accounting softwares do not have. They do not make it easy to see what's behind certain numbers. So now we're getting it to load, and now you can see that I recorded two expenses. One on January 29th, 2024, and one on 4/15/2024. Both went to office supplies. They both had different amounts, but they total $343. And that's exactly why QuickBooks thinks we're overdrawn on our account. We had expenses of $343, but no money coming into the bank account. If I finally let my P&L load, I'll see the same thing on the profit and loss. No income here that we recorded, at least, but we have total office supply expenses of $343. So right now, the business has lost $343 if this was the only transactions that we had to record. So this is kind of the product of what you're doing when you're recording transactions in QuickBooks. When you're putting things in different buckets, categorizing things, every time you hit accept or add to add a new transaction, your P&L changes, as does your balance sheet, because your bank account balance is getting updated and your net income, or your equity in this case, is also getting updated. Let's file away a couple more of these transactions. So this Amazon purchase, oops, it already guessed it for me. I just should have let it load. It's Amazon, and this was actually for event supplies. What I did there, I know from using QuickBooks that it doesn't save the actual description, the name that I pick for that account that I want to create. As soon as you hit a new account type, it wipes out what you had typed there. So I always just Control C just to make sure I'm copying it so that I don't have to retype it. So this was for event supplies. And I believe these last three were also for event supplies. So let's talk about how to categorize things in bulk. Now, if items are, you can see I've grabbed 3 different transactions totaling $401. If items are the exact same vendor going to the exact same QuickBooks account, you can actually edit things in a batch like this. So instead of hitting accept, because we actually don't have payee or category listed here, it's not going to be able to accept. We don't want to exclude, so let's go to edit. If I edit, I'm going to say, hey, this is a expense. This is not a transfer. This is an expense. Amazon is my vendor, and event supplies is my account. I'm going to apply and accept. If you apply, it just changes the descriptions on each line, but you still have to go through one by one and accept. I know I have confidence that QuickBooks will change these things and won't make up their own vendors or account names or anything. So I'm just going to apply and accept, which should get rid of those 3 transactions on my bank download screen. 3 transactions have been categorized. Now if I run my P&L again, now I see 2 different accounts on my P&L. One is event supplies with all 4 of those transactions, and the other one is still office supplies that we recorded from before. Let's let it load. Bingo. There we go. We have Amazon, event supplies, and all the different amounts. So especially if you're going back in time, recording a lot of transactions, it's really helpful to be grabbing things in bulk and recording them as opposed to one at a time sitting there typing in Amazon, event supplies, Amazon, event supplies. It can get pretty tedious. This is also Amazon. Let's change this to office supplies. We're definitely going to do more recording of transactions. However, I do want to show one other thing. Like I talked about before, it's really important to name the vendor or the customer. Because if you go into your vendor list, which is here in my bookmarks, but also saved under expenses and then vendors, you have all of your vendors here. And this is mainly to provide an idea of what vendors you still owe money to. So a lot of businesses will add all of their bills into this screen so that they know what bills are coming up in the next 15, 30, 45 days that they need to pay. So this open balance only really makes sense if you're adding bills. But for our purposes, if we click on Amazon, the first tab it shows you is the transaction list, which is super, super helpful. Again, it's giving us pop-ups to say, hey, you can kind of rearrange this however you want. If you sort things by class or location, you can also see those here. However, we're just really interested in the actual category. So from this screen, you can't change anything about the actual payee. You have to click into it to see the details, and then you can change it to, Office Max or some other office supply company. But the main part of this vendor screen is really just to confirm categories. This is an easy way to change categories and also to see the total amount that you've spent in any given period of time. You can see this lists all transactions. You can also sort by just expenses, just bills, just recently paid items, and you can also filter by the date. So you can look at the last 12 months, you can look at calendar year to date, anything you want, but this gives you a really good snapshot of how much you spent in total at each vendor. So that's why I highly recommend categorizing each transaction with a vendor name so that it's easier to do this kind of analysis. All right, next up, we will go through more transactions on the bank screen and start recording some income items as well.